Everyone. In this talk of RA discussion, I'll look at working with RA, the struggles, the kind of help you can get to keep working with less impact on your body. Rheumatoid arthritis affects everything about your life, including your job, and working with RA means using your body and your mind starting first thing in the morning and keep going until the evening. And this can be a real struggle when you live with the unpredictable nature of RA. But did you know you can find health professionals who can help you work better without that hit to your body? Joining me today is Catherine Backman, occupational therapist and professor emeritus at the University of British Columbia. She has been department head at the university and has extensive experience in rheumatology. She has served as president of the Association of Rheumatology Health Professionals and the Canadian Association of Occupational Therapists. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about this important aspect of living with RA. And we're going to jump right into things with the first question. In the past, it was common for people living with RA to stop working within 10 years of diagnosis due to disability and damage to their joints. Despite advances in treatment helping more people achieve remission than ever before, many still struggle at work. And actually up to 40%, that's almost half of us, change our career goals because of this illness. Clearly, work is still a huge issue when you have RA. Catherine, what are your thoughts on the challenges involved in working with rheumatoid arthritis?
It's the challenges relate to the unpredictability of living with RA, I think. And you've cited some of the important facts that the disease affects a lot of people in terms of their ability to continue working or to find work that they're able to engage in on a regular basis. So the ups and downs, or this unpredictability and uncertainty of living with RA and its symptoms like pain and fatigue, can be really challenging to manage in general, but also within the workplace. And work is only one part of our lives. We need to balance the time and energy that we spend on our work with the other things that we need to do in terms of managing our home or engaging in family life and things that we like to do for leisure and just to enjoy life in general. So we have to figure out a way. There's an economic reality to work. We can't pay our bills. We can't enjoy life without some sort of income that's going to pay for our home and lifestyle and so forth. So most of us have to figure out a way to both work for the necessities of life and some of the extras that are important to us. So since RA is a lifelong illness, and working lives are generally also a large proportion of adult life, then we want to find a way to concurrently manage arthritis and engage in work in a satisfactory way. So as you've noted, some people with RA are going to leave work prematurely due to their arthritis, and others, while they'll remain at work, they'll struggle a little bit with some of their work. So there are ways to help make work more manageable and to concurrently manage arthritis and work responsibilities. And that's the challenge, trying to figure out that balance for each person.
Yeah, and we are going to get into some of the specifics that you can do to help work better without that impact on your body. But I think one of the things you mentioned was kind of nailed it in the sense that you're talking about having the energy to also live the rest of your life. And I think one of the things, and I speak from personal experience, is that all my energy goes to work. And at the end of the day, I'm like a wrung out dishcloth, basically. And I think a lot of people find that. So that's what we're going to talk about a little later. But first, you were part of a 3-phase study called Making It Work that was designed to help people with inflammatory arthritis to keep working. Why was this so important to do this study? Other than the things we've already discussed.
Yeah. So the Making It Work study began about 20 years ago. And at that time, while there was a fair amount of research that told us there were high rates of work disability or loss of employment related to arthritis. There was very little research on how to help people retain their employment and manage it in the workplace. So we knew a lot about the numbers in terms of how many people left work or became work disabled. And so there were studies on work disability saying that arthritis had high rates of work disability, but there was very little that was looking at, well, what strategies were people using who successfully stayed at work, or what things could we do to help people maintain their employment or find appropriate work. So it was a really important study to launch in that context. And it's not the only one. Other people around North America and around the world were identifying that same gap in research. So it was perhaps because employment wasn't really seen as a health issue that we didn't see this in the health literature. But it was something that was falling through the cracks in our health and social systems. So making it work was important because there was this big gap in helping people with arthritis stay employed, and work is part of a healthy and productive life. And people living with inflammatory types of arthritis needed some supports to effectively manage their arthritis in the workplace, or to transfer some of the self-management strategies they were using at home into the workplace and access the different services that might be appropriate to their particular workplace.
Well, and I think it was part of a transition in medicine, rheumatology. Like you said, work hasn't been seen as a health issue, but I think as we transition to treating the whole person within their life, I think that is something that the study was at the forefront of changing the perspective. The study led to a development of an e-learning program called Making It Work. How does that program help people with RA to continue working?
Yeah, so the Making It Work program started off as kind of a face-to-face program and some group education and so forth. But for a variety of reasons transitioned into an online program. Some of that was just because it's targeted for people who are already working. And as you mentioned, you can be exhausted at the end of a workday and traveling for yet another medical related appointment, so forth, can be challenging in and of itself. But also people are remote to different locations. So it being online, it didn't matter where people were located geographically, and it reduced commuting time and so forth. So Making It Work is a completely online program now. It gives people the knowledge and tools to better manage at work while they're living with the ups and downs of their arthritis. It focuses on early intervention. It's targeted towards people who are currently employed and have inflammatory arthritis, and we're trying to prevent work loss with this program. But for people who need to change their job or who are still need to work, it still has a variety of tips that might help people identify the best work for them, or some of the features that might be helpful for them in finding another job. But it is targeted at preventing work loss. And the current version has 5 learning modules that people do on their own online. And those topics are managing arthritis in general, so kind of a refresher on things they might have already learned from some of their health professionals. Managing fatigue at work, managing stress at work, communication strategies for the workplace. That could include things about making the decision whether or not you just close a diagnosis, but also how you request accommodations or changes that enable you to continue working. And job accommodations is one entire topic on its own. And so each of those takes most people about an hour to review that content. So that's kind of 5 hours, like a 5-hour course, if you like, but they're spaced out. And there's 5 small group discussions that occur online. So there you connect with other people who have arthritis, and there's a trained facilitator to help you answer questions and really learn how to apply the information that's in each of those 5 learning modules. So there's 5 group discussions that occur after each of those modules. And then there's 2 one-on-one consultations that also occur online. So each participant can meet with a vocational rehabilitation counselor for a one-on-one consultation and with an occupational therapist. So the vocational rehab counselor can help people access different accommodations or explain the legislation or the laws that affect their access to accommodations and so forth. And the occupational therapist goes through an ergonomic assessment or self-assessment with the person and offer some tips or solutions for ergonomic adjustments to their workplace. So that people should get kind of the knowledge, some of the skills that are necessary to make work a little bit more accessible and easier to accommodate and easier to integrate how they manage their arthritis in their job site.
Thank you so much. And some of the terms that Catherine just mentioned are legal terms, and we're going to dive right into that in a second. I just want to let you know, if you're interested in looking at the Making It Work resource, you can find it on the website of Arthritis Research Canada. And I believe it's free, which I think you mentioned, right? It's free.
Yeah. So there's a website where you there's a free webinar there where you can have a look and find out more about the program, and that's at arthritisresearch.ca, and then just search for Making It Work, and you'll find that, and you can then follow up either using the feedback form that's there or send an email. The program lead is Dr. Deanne Lakai, and so she and her staff, the email or the feedback form would go to her staff, and they can connect you with the program. So the program is not totally public just yet. Until they've completed the most recent randomized controlled trial on looking at the 5-year or longer term effect on it. But there are ongoing studies, so there are ways for people to access the program, but I think it's very close to becoming more publicly available. And you can access the ergonomic assessment on the Arthritis Research Canada website. You can access the free webinars about it, so you can get started.
So now that we kind of covered the study and so on, let's talk about legal stuff. And I promise this would be interesting because when RA affects your ability to function in some way, your ability to keep working is protected under human rights legislation. Let's dive into how this affects your rights at work. And one of the terms you mentioned in your overview of the study and the resource was the concept of accommodation. What does that mean?
Yeah. So accommodation means making adjustments so that enable people to work. So those adjustments can be strategies in like things like flexible scheduling or the times that people go to work, or it can mean making physical adjustments to the workplace. So some of that can be related to disability legislation, like there has to be a way to access the building where you do the work. And that's not specific to a job accommodation. That's related to accommodating people of differing abilities or people unable to use stairs. There needs to be ramp or elevator access or things like that. So if you think of it that way, people are kind of familiar with automatic doors or elevators and escalators instead of stairs. Then job accommodations are the same sorts of things, that there can be a different way of doing, or there can be relaxation of different kinds of rules, or there can be equipment that is adjusted or purchased to enable somebody to do things. So there's legislation that's specific to accommodation in the workplace, and also higher education or places where you do training to get a job. that accommodation legislation exists for those places.
Mhm.
And it means individuals can request reasonable accommodations to enable them to better do their work or the tasks that are associated with their job. So where there's some interpretation is in this declaration of reasonable accommodation. And the reasonableness depends on the context. So if you're with a big corporate employer, they have more resources. They probably even have an occupation. They might have an occupational health nurse, or they might have a ergonomist. They might have people who are there to help all employees do their work safely and efficiently. Whereas a smaller employer who only employs 3, 4, 5 people doesn't have the same resources. So what's reasonable depends a little bit on the context.
Mhm.
So the cost of accommodation and of the accommodation that's necessary and the size and resources of the employer kind of determines that.
So yeah, like I think one of the ways I tend to look at accommodation, it's about focusing on the goal of a particular area of your job, and you mess with the ways to get there. For instance, one accommodation I use is I'm a writer, but I can't type very much because of RA. So I use voice recognition software to write. And the end goal is to write something, and it doesn't matter how you get there. So that's kind of one of the ways I look at it.
Exactly, yeah.
So if you're asking for an accommodation, do you have to share your diagnosis? Like, again, we're talking about the legalities of it, in the sense that you are entitled to be accommodated, like the reasonable accommodation, which is usually based in cost, and we'll get to the cost of accommodation a little later. But there's also your right to privacy. How does that affect your asking for accommodation? Do you need to tell your supervisor what your condition is?
Yeah, no, you don't need to share a diagnosis in order to get an accommodation. So that's entirely up to the individual. You're entitled to privacy. The employer can say that they need a formal request. So they it kind of depends on your relationship with the employer, and this is also determined by the context. If you're dealing with a big corporation, a medium-sized company, or a smaller employer, you may feel more or less comfortable disclosing certain kinds of information. So you may need a written note or documentation from a health professional, for example, that says this is the kind of accommodation you need. But they don't disclose the diagnosis, nor any of the symptoms. They just declare. So as you were talking about, what is the end goal? So they just declare what are the types of accommodation. You need more time to do work. You need a flexible work schedule. You need equipment that decreases the stress on a certain joint or something along those lines. So if you require a formal request, the details of diagnosis and other personal health information are unnecessary and remain private. Just the type of accommodation that's necessary is there. And lots of people don't need to it's not always necessary to make a formal request for a job accommodation. So if you develop good relationships and communication with coworkers and supervisors, then often you're just making a suggestion that makes work easier and more efficient for everybody. So often you're making a suggestion that will improve the way that everyone's working, and you don't have to make it a formal job demand or request. You can also make use of things that already exist in the workplace. So in some instances, that might be a shop steward, for example. So you could make a suggestion or recommendation to a union representative who brings it to employers' attention, or there may be, especially in larger companies, there may be somebody who is responsible for, especially in highly computerized environments, there's almost always somebody who's designated in for works workstation ergonomics. And so that could be a person who helps with that setting, or there might be somebody who's designated a health and safety committee. And so this job accommodations are very similar to health promotion and prevention of injury type requests. So often there are other ways of making suggestions to request the kinds of accommodations you need for your arthritis.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, that there is that overlap, and in the sense of something like an ergonomic assessment of your workstation is something that can be really useful, specifically when you have RA, but it's also really useful to others to have their workstation set up in a way that doesn't damage their body. It keeps them working longer. It helps the employer have less people out sick. It helps, it just creates a better workplace. So what does that accommodation do for a person's impact to how does it help someone stay employed, and what does it look like the before and after sort of?
Right. So accommodations can help people with arthritis manage their symptoms. So they're going to be different for everybody, because we're really looking at the fit between that individual and their arthritis and what their needs are to help manage their systems, the job tasks or the occupation that they have. And so, there's reams of different jobs and occupations. And so we're looking at that fit between the person, their job, and the environment in which they're doing it. And so we can find solutions in the context of any of those things. So people might be working in, if we take the computer workstation as one that people might be familiar with, it might be a matter of just making some minor adjustments to the positioning of everything. So maybe the desk, the height of the computer or the screen or the keyboard, maybe a different keyboard that accommodates how that person types or needs to use, or as you said, you use voice recognition software. So that's a very common adaptation for people who have difficulty using keyboards, and they don't have to use these things all of the time. It might be that people can use a keyboard for a couple of hours a day, but they can't use it all day. And so having voice recognition is the backup strategy. And so they can use the voice recognition for short communications or something like that. And even people who can use a keyboard just find dictating something to be much more efficient or a speedier way of doing things. So the before and after, the before kind of looks like people have identified some things that maybe exacerbate pain or leave them they just feel too tired to get their job done. So they go to work and they know they're meant to be working, but they're too tired to get the jobs done. And so the after is looking like, well, we've solved some of those problems. So in fact, they are using their computer more efficiently, and it's pain-free, or has significantly reduced the pain, or we've changed the schedule or inserted breaks, because you need both a movement break and a rest break to kind of help balance fatigue or manage fatigue. So we've gone through people's usual activities and tried to find solutions that are sometimes based in changing the environment, sometimes based in giving them a little bit more autonomy to decide what job tasks get done when. So they change the schedule, or maybe we've found some alternative ways of doing things that work for them in that particular workplace. Sometimes too, we're also looking at it. Arthritis has its ups and downs. So sometimes these accommodations are only used some of the time. And that in itself, when you're in an environment with lots of coworkers and things, that can also present difficulties, because people don't understand exacerbations and remissions or ups and downs of arthritis. So they don't understand why you can do it sometimes and not do it other times. And that's why the communication skills module can be really important in helping people explain. And you don't owe anybody all of these things, but sometimes it makes it makes work way more pleasant if you can, if you're able to explain and your coworkers understand. And things like coworker support and supervisory support have been identified as really important ways of keeping people successfully employed. Successful meaning both employed, but also enjoying your work.
Yeah, well, the work is a place where we spend about 8 hours, like that's a third of our lives that we spend at work. So I think it's actually important to have that good relationship. But you should also know that it's like you have a right to be accommodated and
Yes.
reasonable. And if your coworkers aren't dealing well with it, it's like if you have a good relationship, there's stuff you can do to talk to them. But otherwise, that's something you report to your supervisor, and they need to kind of step in and deal with that. I know that some people worry about asking for accommodation, thinking that it's expensive and they'll be denied. What is the average cost for an accommodation?
So I don't actually know what the average cost would be because there's so many different kinds of jobs, but a lot of them are a lot of accommodations are have no direct cost to them other than maybe the consultation with an expert or a colleague who helps you figure them out. So, maybe there's a fee associated with getting an ergonomic consultation, for example. But if you're making an adjustment to a flexible schedule, or you're negotiating more autonomy and deciding what tasks can get done when, or adding a reminder, an automated reminder to get up and move, or take a 30-second micro break, or things like that. They don't have a big direct cost. So there was maybe a little bit of a cost in terms of consulting with someone who can make those suggestions and access things like the software for you. But often a lot of those things are very low or in the public domain and are free ideas. Ideas might not cost anything. And then others might be very inexpensive, like the purchase of a document holder because you can't hold, so it's a few dollars, so not very much. They may get more expensive if you're replacing different tools, but you might be just adjusting things. So if you already have an adjustable desk and an adjustable chair, it might be just adjusting those, but it may be purchasing a chair that costs $800. So there can be a cost there. And then there can be more substantial costs based on specialized equipment for the kind of work that someone does. And so then you're asking the employer to buy, some automated piece of equipment that is readily available, but not all employers update all of their equipment all of the time. So you could think of something like a supermarket cashier setting that we've all been in supermarkets that still have the old setups, and we've been in ones where we kind of go, gosh, this is kind of glossy, fancy equipment that's here, and the cashier hardly has to do anything. Based on a casual glance or whatever, and so changing those kinds of work setups can be a bigger financial outlay, but they're not just for a single person with arthritis. They're for all employees, and they reduce the incidence of musculoskeletal injuries for other employees and makes it more efficient for the customers or something. So a lot of these things that are more expensive are there's a good return on investment for the employer.
I know in the U.S., the average accommodation, I read on one of the government sources, average accommodation costs $500.
Yeah.
If we transfer that to Canada, that's probably the average accommodation. Probably, if there's any cost at all, is less than $1,000, and that means that it's like, and just to be clear, that's not something you pay. That's your employer's duty to pay. So like if that's what worries you, often it's a matter of getting that expert in there and basically tweaking the process of how you work. As Catherine said, sometimes that takes equipment, and sometimes, often it doesn't. Like, one of the things that has been a big accommodation for instance, people with disabilities, such as myself, over the pandemic, is working from home, working remotely. And with the ongoing fight of many employers wanting people back at work and employees saying, no, actually, I get more stuff done at home, and I'm not as tired, and I have room for the rest of my life and my kids. That's an accommodation, right? So, and it's, as we have seen in the last 3 years, that's something that actually helps everyone. So we have talked about different accommodations. My next question was, what are some common types of accommodation? And I think we've talked about most of them. We've dealt with computers. We've dealt with, like, for instance, another one is moving your parking spot closer to the entrance.
Right.
What are some other ones you can think of?
Yeah. So a lot of them are just some of the physical ones are repositioning things. So, like, maybe storage, like changing storage systems. So frequently accessed items are at a more reachable height, or sometimes people just get into bad habits. So there's no room to move underneath the desk because boxes have been stored there. So sometimes it's just cleaning and tidying things up, or repositioning equipment. There might be a little bit of redesign, but some of the most common accommodations that we've seen through the Making It Work program is that a large proportion of people deal with computer systems. So we've seen just repositioning, or effectively positioning, supporting people in a good posture, whether they're standing, sitting, or using sit-to-stand type desks. So some of the most common accommodations are to the adjustment to computer keyboards, the height of the computer screen. Also, just scheduling types of issues. So getting up and moving for these little micro breaks. So a timer goes off every 20 minutes to remind people to look away from their screen, or it goes off every half hour so that people take a 30-second stretch break before they continue work. So it helps them balance or pace some of the different activities. Things like a new and adjustable work chair, or adapted keyboards, or hand tools that actually fit people's hands. So those have been some of the most common ones. And also people encouraging people to use some of the strategies that they already know work to manage pain and fatigue in their workplace. So to maybe have a cold pack available for a sore joint, so that when they take a break or during their lunchtime, they make use of some strategies that they know that make their joints feel better, for example.
Yeah, and I think as well, if you're working in a warehouse or a factory setting, it could be something like having a stool to sit instead of standing.
Right.
If you normally walked long distances in a warehouse, it could be having, in the past, it could be having something like a scooter where you sit down and drive. But with the advent of, I believe they're called personal electric vehicles, like the electric scooters and things, you could probably use one of those.
A trolley is a common thing too. So just having something, so to not have to carry things in your hands or arms. But and certainly in where there's a lot of moving and carrying, or lifting and carrying, usually that equipment already exists. So maybe sometimes it's an adaptation to that equipment if it's not a good fit for the individual person. So maybe it's a new trolley, but maybe it's just adjusting the hand grips on a trolley so that it can be pushed more efficiently, or maybe it's changing the caster wheels so they roll more easily, or putting a brake on them so that they don't roll away from you, or so it's making an adjustment. But a lot of these adjustments are just really fit to that specific job. And so that's why it's hard sometimes for us to say, because that's why we use computer workstations a lot as examples, because so many people have to use it for part of their job. So that's the thing that people have in common. But then if, it's quite different if you're a flight attendant or a kindergarten teacher or a glass blower. I mean, some of the jobs and occupations that we've seen people have are quite diverse. So there's a number, and usually it's a joint effort. So you're working with an occupational therapist or a voc rehab counselor, and you expert on your job, and maybe working alongside somebody who's from the workplace. And usually there's a way to identify some potential solutions to a problem. And sometimes it takes more than one try to figure it out. But very often a solution can be found for both short-term and longer term. And often we can predict what the needs might be to accommodate some of those fluctuations in disease activity. So you might not need the accommodation all of the time, but we can predict what types of supports might be necessary for days when maybe you're not feeling quite up to par, and a few different supports would be helpful. Also, on the Talkover RA website, the discussion guide that's there for people starts off with a really important question, like who are you and what is it that you need? So there's one work-related example on that discussion guide. You're a kindergarten teacher who can't get down on the floor, like for circle time with the kids that you work with. So that's a perfect example of the type of thing that we look at when we're talking about accommodations in the workplace. What are the things that you need to do? And then we look at, is there a different way of doing it? And when we look at the different ways of doing it, we try and find a satisfactory and permanent solution, not something that's okay, but not quite not quite right. So so we try and find something that's suitable and satisfactory in that particular workplace and that particular job.
And as Catherine mentioned, the Talkover RA discussion guide, which will be linked below, is an excellent tool to help you kind of get a sense of what's the issue, what are your symptoms, what are the things that are difficult, where do you want to go? And you can use it both to talk to your doctor in terms of any notes you may need from them, but also just to get clarity yourself before you approach your supervisor about what you need. So you're very clear on what is it that's difficult, what impacts you the most. And you know your job. And I think, as Catherine said, it's a team approach. It's you with your knowledge of your body and your job. It's potentially your supervisor who knows what the end goal has to be. It's an occupational therapist who can help you with innovative solutions to not put the same strain on your body, and so on. And I think that's the important thing, is that there is help out there, and you don't have to just keep pushing, because the goal is that you're not so tired when you go home in the evening that you can't, play with your kids or go for a walk or, do the things you enjoy. So thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing your expertise on this important topic. If anyone has any questions, just drop them below, and I'll hover in the comments to do the best I can to answer. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Great. You're welcome.
It was a pleasure.